Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Did you take the day off or hard nose to grindstone?
Oh, notes to grindstone, please.
Right on.
I would like to think that the presidents that we honor, only George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, I choose.
Yes.
We call it President's Day, but it's only just presidents plural. I feel it's very specific. I feel it's just two presidents that we're honoring today. I am anyway. That's how I'm observing it today. I don't know how you're doing it. We're not observing. I'm not observing Warren Harding today.
No, he can get stuffed.
Warren Harding, who croaked in San Francisco.
I did not know that. No.
Did you not know this?
No.
No. Randy, welcome. Did you know this, that Warren Harding bought it in San Francisco?
I did not know that.
So actually, so I was at the House of Shields.
Yes, great bar in Soma. Yeah.
Well, so I'm at the House of Shields. Who am I with?
O'Grady, of course.
Of course, exactly. Right, well played. So Stephen O'Grady is in town. He wants to. So we go to the House of Shields, and I bring up Warren Harding, of course, the death of Warren Harding. Why do I bring up the death of Warren Harding? Because Warren Harding died in the Palace Hotel across the street.
Huh.
And I'm like, yeah, it's great to be here. It's in the Palace Hotel here, where Warren Harding's final moments on this earth. Last words, I need water. You gotta feel that's like emblematic of someone not exactly going out on their own terms.
Yeah.
So water, and that was the end in the Palace Hotel. And Jason Hoffman, you know, I both those have been on the pod. I believe it was Jason who said, "You are the only person who knows that. That is so obscure." That is really not that obscure. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is like a U.S. president died here. Like, this is just not. It feels obscure because Warren Harding feels like it, but Warren Harding was the president of the United States. It's like it was a very big deal.
There weren't that many, actually. Yeah,
there weren't that many. Not that many died in office. Not that many died in office in San Francisco, namely one. So it's like this is a big deal.
Yeah,
and I'm like, to the contrary, I think you could walk across the street and you could, any employee at the Palace Hotel is going to know that Warren Harding died in the Palace Hotel. He's like, no way, $20 you're on. I'm like, all right.
I mean, that was an opportunity to really make some money, I feel like.
Oh, stay with me. So we go across the street. And of course, the first person we see in the hotel, and we would agree that it is the first hotel employee we see. And of course, the first hotel employee we see is the concierge. And so I go up to the concierge, where Jason and I go up together, and I'm like, sir, a U.S. president died in this hotel. And I didn't even get to the end of that sentence. And the knowing look in that guy's eyes, I'm like, I have this thing like absolutely aced. Like, this guy is going to be able to answer any single question about this guy. So I finished the sentence, died in this hotel. He said, yes. And I'm wondering if you might be able to answer some questions about that. He said, certainly. And then I think he was a little offended when I was like, what was the name of that president? Just like, come on. It's like, I was hoping for I want like a room number, the time of death. I mean, there's so much else I could offer. But he's like, and he just says, with just like the look that you would give a toddler that thinks they've asked a sophisticated question that has not actually asked a sophisticated question at all, he just says, Warren G. Harding, the whatever president he was of the United States. And Jason's kind of dumbfounded. And then he immediately starts like, well, I mean, that's because it's the concierge. And I'm like, okay. And now this is where you like opportunity to really take some money. I'm like, okay, $1,000 bet. We find someone for whom the question needs to be translated who knows the answer.
Love it.
And like you can find, because like you work at the hotel, like you're the housekeeping, like whatever your role is at the hotel, it's a hotel. Like you know what the U.S. president died there. It's part of the lore. You know what I mean? And he lost his courage. He's like, no, I'm not taking that bet. I probably overshot. I should have gone like, $100 or something. I probably overshot the mark. But, so I guess what I am today celebrating, I guess, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and the death of Warren Harding. Not the life, mind you, but only the death. Scandal-ridden presidency, Teapot Dome scandal. Like the guy was he was how they give each president that has like a nickname associated with them. I was super into the presidents as a kid.
Really?
And yeah. That didn't seem earnest.
Oh, no, go on, please. No, that's good.
Like, I feel like I'm like the DeepSeek R1 model. He has said something that does not seem earnest. It may be sarcastic. I will need to ask a further probing question to know if and the Warren Harding's nickname was the man from Main Street, which is, that kind of tells you this is not a sparkling presidency. This is but that was when the standards for the presidency were different, and now I would take Warren Harding 1,000 times
like
over.
The man from Main Street. Like, you've got my vote.
Man from Main Street. I'll take that. That sounds terrific. I mean, I can feel a sense of rectitude just the way you say it. Yes. So anyway, welcome, Randy. Welcome as we celebrate the President's Day here on Oxide and Friends. So Randy, I'm gonna we know you're a listener of the pod. Is that a fair?
I can't say long-time listener, but I'm a relatively recent-time listener. But I've been binging, and not just because you invited me, but because I was a big fan of On the Metal, and then you guys went dark on that, and came back in your various spaces and clubhouses and ephemeral things, and so I lost track. But now I'm back.
Now you're back. Well, so as you know, there are some episodes in which we get trolled. We get trolled by a tweet. We get trolled by a blog post. And I know that you have thought to yourself, well, this is good because this is not one of those episodes, but this actually is one of those episodes, unfortunately. And it's got nothing to do with the meta ad. Don't worry, I'm not going there. Or no further there anyway. So the reason that this is actually there is kind of an underlying troll here is there was this and again I don't want to over-index on the it's more the sentiment that this was a tweet, but I've posted the Blue Sky post in the channel, and it is from let's just say a young technologist in Silicon Valley. It doesn't really matter who, but it's and the tweet is, Silicon Valley built the modern world. Why shouldn't we run it? And this is in kind of tacit support of what we are seeing currently in Washington, and this very much move fast, break things approach to the government, which is breaking a lot of things as it turns out. And and Randy, I imagine, surely you must feel the same way of just like your skin crawling when you have someone who is not just choosing to speak for Silicon Valley, but someone who is so grossly unqualified and speaking in a way that so doesn't represent so many of us in Silicon Valley. And
yeah, totally.
Right, exactly. You're just like, yes, that is one way of expressing the reaction I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, look, feel free to complete your thought, but yeah, it's crazy. The fact that, it's this, whatever, PayPal mafia, slightly enlarged, and the worst of them all that are destroying the republic, that's not great. And then what has annoyed me actually, maybe trolled me in this area is these relative. I've read several articles recently about, Silicon Valley's always been super hard right.
Yeah.
No. Have you ever been here? We were since the 70s. It's been hippies and LSD and counterculture and changing the world. And it's only relatively recently in the history of Silicon Valley that it has been about money, money, money. And even the people, that have made all that money, and there are a number of them, and I know a number of them, for the most part, they didn't start coming here just to make bank, right? They came here to do things that they cared about. And, oh, by the way, those things that they cared about, turns out that, millions and billions of other people cared about, and therefore we went from there. But I do get my backup, with this implication that, everybody in Silicon Valley is an Elon Musk or a Peter Thiel.
That's right. Well,
that's not all right.
That's not all right. And I think that also, one thing that I've kind of come to except is that, and I think something that's important to express is that there are many different Silicon Valleys, and there's a tapestry of Silicon Valley, and there are many different threads through it.
We contain multitudes, Bryan. Multitudes.
We do contain multitudes. We do contain multitudes, and it's like, I think for people who haven't been out to the literal Silicon Valley, if you are out in the Santa Clara Valley, it's barely a valley. It's like a valley is not the term that's going to come to mind. You're like, okay, I see, like there is a mountain range over there, and I guess there is technically another mountain range that I can see way over there. Is this the valley that people are talking about? It's like, yes, this is this kind of this floodplain. It's the Bay Area, but the Silicon Valley as metaphor, and I've often spoken of kind of my Silicon Valley, or Adam, our Silicon Valley, which is the Silicon Valley of the Traders 8 or of Xerox PARC, or Randy of the counterculture. And there is no one I think has got a better perspective on this, or you've got a unique perspective on this whole thing in many different kind of dimensions. So can we get into your life story for a little bit? Do you mind if we...
I don't mind at all. I do not have the best perspective, but I do have a unique perspective. So I'll happily...
I think that's right. Yeah, I think... because in particular, so you come out... You're not actually born here. You're born, I guess, in Pittsburgh when your parents are at what we now call CMU, but was then, I guess, Carnegie Tech. Is that right?
Carnegie Institute of Technology. Yeah, everybody abbreviated to Carnegie Tech. Yep.
And you come out as your father is he coming out to work for Berkeley Computer Company? Do I have that right?
You have it exactly right. Yeah. So both my parents grew up in Western Pennsylvania around Pittsburgh, and they met at what was then Carnegie Tech and now Carnegie Mellon University. My dad earned his undergrad in EE in 1965, and then got his PhD in computer science in 1970. And then
computer science in 1970. God, that is a very early computer science department.
Yeah, I believe that it might be the first computer science PhD program in the U.S.
Yeah, that right.
Which might mean in the world. Yeah. So his application to join the PhD program was his professor, Gordon Bell, saying, "Hey, Dick, I'm starting up a computer science lab. Would you like to join it?" And my dad saying, "Yes." So, that was pretty cool.
Worth elaborating a little bit on who Gordon Bell was. I think Gordon Bell has passed away, right? You think that was...
yeah, I mean, he's another generation.
That was recently.
Yeah.
But describe Gordon Bell a little bit, because, Gordon Bell just passed away last year, May of 2024. But so a pioneer of computing, for sure. And just kind of amazing to think of. The discipline is still so young, in so many regards that you have. So he goes to work for, and then picks up his family and moves to the West Coast to go to Berkeley Computer Company.
Yeah. So I was a year and a half. So I was born in Pittsburgh, like I said, Shadyside Hospital, right outside Carnegie, and then we moved out when I was 1.5, 1970. So he's got, freshly minted PhD. We'll talk a little bit about what it's in, or I'll just mention his PhD proposed FPGAs. Like, great. Okay. I actually was just looking around in my little archives, which is a shelf on my bookshelf. And I have an actual print copy of his PhD that was typed by my mom.
Oh wow!
Yeah, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's a photocopy of it because the original is obviously in the CMU archives or whatever. But
what an heirloom, to have. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. So he proposed in his I forget exactly what he called it. Reconfigurable cellular logic. I think that might have been the title, something like that. Didn't use the term FPGA that came later, but it's exactly that idea. It's earlier, all computing was von Neumann architecture, so separate, the data from the processing. And this was, hey, what if we took the silicon and made it super generic and reconfigured it on the fly, essentially. And it's only relatively recently, so again, this PhD's 1970. It's only relatively recently, let's call it 2000s maybe, but certainly 2010s, where that has become somewhat mainstream. I think there's an Amazon FPGA
There's
service,
Instance, yeah.
and then Microsoft on Bing had a project that they called Catapult, which was pairing FPGAs to do the ranking function right next to CPUs, essentially, that computed all the search stuff. So anybody who's super interested in that should Google Catapult. Anyway, but like relatively niche, from that perspective. In the broader ecosystem. Obviously, what you guys would know about and what my dad was originally envisioning was testing new silicon, right? So like, hey, let's build the generic silicon and then use that to refine techniques and ideas and then kind of reify those, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. And we I know it's gauche to make reference to one's early own podcast. Although actually, do I actually believe that? Because I do it so frequently.
You do it all the time. I mean,
we do it like 6 times an episode now. So gauche it up.
All right. Yeah, exactly. I'll gauche it up. But the our conversation with Roger Kadori was so good in that regard, Adam.
Yeah.
And that was I ran interview to Raja, but a pioneer in his own right, and kind of just talking about the differences between a CPU and a GPU and FPGA and ASIC, and kind of when you need these different things, and and soft logic and FPGA has got a very important role to play. So yeah, kind of wild that your dad was proposing this in his PhD thesis. That's really
it's crazy. So if you track the graph of the papers about FPGAs all the way back, like they sort of terminate or begin at this PhD thesis.
Randy, I know he passed a number of years ago. I watched your talk where he had passed recently. And was he delighted to see FPGAs develop in the way that they did?
That's a great question. He consulted on the side every so often for Xilinx and
nice. That's
what's
awesome.
the other one? Is it Altera? That might not be right.
It's Altera.
Yeah, right.
Altera. Well, the other one. Yeah, there are this is where you get the. There are a couple other ones. Lattice is definitely weeping because you're the other one you're referring to is not Lattice. It's Altera. Altera was an Intel property. And what the hell? I'm just going to make reference to our episode on Intel. Sorry, Intel after Gelsinger.
Number 2.
I'm not going to apologize for it. You know what? I'm loud and proud about it. Just go listen to our Intel after Gelsinger episode where I think we mentioned Altera at least once. But yes. So that's a great question because clearly that's an entire industry.
Oh,
that
can you
obviously
imagine? Can you imagine kind of doing some work as in your early 20s that then turned out to be like this whole, I'll make up a number, $1 billion industry or whatever? That'd be wild. That'd be crazy.
Hold on. we're not there yet. So I think he was pleased, but it wasn't the crowning achievement of his life by a long shot because basically he never did FPGAs for serious after he completed his PhD. We will fill in the blanks here, but he ended up at Xerox PARC and started most of modern computer graphics, in particular animation. So there's a direct line from the work that he did at PARC to Pixar and Toy Story, and even there's a connection to Jim Clark, interestingly, and SGI. So so what he is known for is computer graphics and being, again, follow the graph of the contributions back. And he's a very early contributor to digital video graphics, which I'm sure we'll go into in great detail. But.
Yeah, and it's almost understating it in terms of his. He's at Xerox PARC, and Randy, I know that you're a big fan, as am I, of Dealers of Lightning, the book on Xerox PARC, and I'm sure you've read it many times, but the chapter on your dad, I think, is just extraordinary. And I think it's kind of amazing to me is that he is actually too revolutionary for Xerox PARC. And one thing, I was just kind of rereading it today, and one thing I wanted to ask you, because what he's doing in particular is he wants to build a color display, which is absolute madness. This is in what, 1974, something like that.
They formed the lab. So he came out to Berkeley Computer Corporation in 1970. It collapsed exactly perfectly for him because Xerox was right then starting up a lab, in Palo Alto called the Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. And the first 6 or 8 researchers that Bob Taylor seeded the lab with were people from Berkeley Computer Corporation. So those include Chuck Thacker, Butler Lampson, my dad. Simone was at Berkeley Computer Corporation, but went elsewhere and then came back to PARC to do Bravo, which later became Microsoft Word. And then Alan Kay was immediately after those 6.
Just extraordinary. But your dad is at PARC with this kind of like this really personal mission that's a little bit outside the Alto. That's kind of like and I mean, this must have occurred to you, but it definitely occurred to me on reread that it's like your dad was like a PARC within PARC. That like your dad was almost treated by Xerox PARC the way Xerox treated PARC.
Oh my God. So fractal. I mean, obviously I've thought about this for, 50 years, but, Bryan, you've said it. You said it perfectly. That's exactly right. In exactly the same way, to your point, that Xerox, the center, big Rochester, New York based copier company, was like, who are all these crazy long-haired California nutcases? And basically didn't commercialize much of anything. We'll talk about it. They did pay back the lab with a laser printer, but they didn't commercialize any of the other things, which included graphical user interface, object-oriented programming in the form of Smalltalk, the first word processor, which is Simone's Bravo, Ethernet with Bob Metcalf.
I love it. Like Ethernet is like, oh, there's a fourth thing. Oh, right, Ethernet.
Oh yeah, by the way, yeah. I mean, Ethernet's, to your point, Ethernet's not even the first thing that comes out of my mouth.
No, it's not even the first thing that comes to mind. It's just insane.
Yeah. And also email and touchscreens. But other than that, exactly.
Yeah. But within that, your dad is too radical for the group, and that
he's the nutcase's nutcase.
He's the nutcase's nutcase. So I'll tell you the story. But people should, if they're all interested in this conversation, you should go buy and read "Dealers of Lightning," which is 1999 book from Michael Hiltzik about Xerox PARC. There's an earlier one called "Fumbling the Future," which is about the business thing that was written in the 80s. That's hard to get. But Dealers of Lightning is amazing. There's a chapter all about my dad, which is called "The Pariahs." And okay, so Bob Taylor forms this lab, and he came out of ARPA and the whole deal there, and was excellent at assembling really top-notch scientists, researchers, particularly computer people, and bringing them all together and getting them to do amazing things. And so that's why he was running the lab. Cool. And so he got all these people together, and his MO is basically tell people to find what's interesting to them, which he told to my dad, and then mold that interest over time so that everybody's all working kind of in parallel, if that makes any sense, or not in parallel, but like pointed in the same direction.
Like converging. Does that make sense? Is that the
idea? Yeah, converging. Perfect. Yeah. So Bob Taylor's, MO, again, I only met him maybe once or twice when I was very, very young. But so this is all, hearsay or whatever Reed say. So he formed a lab with all these super top-notch, freshly minted PhDs from around the country, and figured that he could mold everyone and point them in the right direction. And he succeeded, with the exception of one or two people, which is my dad and another guy, Alvy Ray Smith, who's the founder of Pixar. We'll get there. So my dad, when my dad showed up, Taylor says, take a year to figure out what you want to do. And my dad, Alvy describes my dad in this wonderful phrasing. It's like, I guess I just reread it. It's like, he's kind of a crusty guy. He doesn't play politics, and he's very stubborn. And I was like, got it in one, Alvy. There's a reason why you were Dad's best man at his, when he remarried in 1990. They were the best of friends forever. And I'll tell you that whole story in a moment. Anyway, okay. So,
Randy, do you mind if I just on the Alvy Ray Smith, because Alvy Ray Smith arrives at PARC, and do you mind if I just read out loud the 2 paragraphs from that chapter from Dealers of Lightning? Because I think that this is really very evocative of their relationship and kind of how extraordinary that time was.
Yeah.
PARC then was at a peak of creative ferment. Each day, some new feat of engineering appeared, virtually demanding to be shown off to anyone with a free moment. And here was Alvy Ray Smith, curious as a cat, at large with time to spare. Shoup fairly tingled with anticipation as he drove to the research center the next morning. Seated next to him was the one man he knew possessed the temperament to get SuperPaint. Sure enough, the machine hit Smith like a lightning bolt between the eyes. He came in the door and got completely entranced, Shoup remembered. He just deep-ended right into it. For the next several days and nights, the bewitched artist scarcely left the lab for more than an hour or two at a time. I realized this is what I had come to California for, Smith recalled. You could just see it was the future. And just to think that, like, that's the founder of Pixar, you know, in terms of, like, when he says being hit by a lightning bolt, this is a lightning bolt that has real ramifications for, like, this is, you know, this is why, you know, your 3-year-old is singing, you know, so I want to build a snowman nonstop, because it all starts here with a, you know, but just
so let me motivate this for people who haven't done that. either haven't lived it or just done the research. So super briefly, Bob Taylor constructed the lab out of these amazing people. He pointed all of them at the office of the future, or something that the other, the like chairman or CEO of Xerox said, the architecture of information. Nobody knew what that meant, including that guy. But everybody was excited about it. And so all the things that I mentioned, right? Graphical user interface, object-oriented programming, Ethernet, laser printer, all those things, you know, direct line to Office of the Future. So you could see how all that research, you know, combined. And it totally did in the Xerox Star, then the Apple Lisa, then finally the Mac. So we can see the direct thread, you know, from everybody else in the lab. My dad, again, because he was told he would have a year to think about it, it only took a month, but he's like, I want to do color graphics and I want to do video. So I want to be able to use this new cool technology called the frame buffer with these new massively new pieces of hardware called semiconductors, made by a little tiny company in the Valley called Intel. And because they made memory then, not it wasn't even CPUs yet. And he wanted to construct the world's first, not the first paint program, but like he wanted to combine a paint program, a few people have played with that, with a frame buffer, a few people have played with that, with being able to take in video at frame rate, 30 frames a second, manipulate it digitally in the frame buffer, and then send it out the other end at frame rate, 30 frames a second. And so that's what he built. So he built a frame. So if you haven't heard of a frame buffer, it's very obvious what it is. You take a frame and you put it in a buffer. And this particular buffer was intended to be exactly the, 640 by 486 which is a standard television, you know, ratio. And so if you multiply that out and you give yourself 1 byte, 8 bits of color, so 256 color depth essentially, then you multiply that out, it comes out to 300 and something thousand bytes. And so Intel was just shipping 2 kilobit shift registers. Shift registers, put a pin in that, not DRAM, but shift registers. And the frame buffer that Dad built, called the system overall is called SuperPaint. The frame buffer that was the core of the system was a bunch of these shift registers all chained together to be one long, massive virtual shift register of 300 and some odd thousand bytes. And the way that it worked is, it was like shifting along, byte by byte, chunk. The video comes in, it gets manipulated, and it comes out raster scan. So people know how television works, right? The raster scans one direction, then it scans the next direction, one lower, then it scans the next direction, one lower, et cetera, back and forth and back and forth. And that snaky back and forth that the raster does was represented directly, 1 byte each, in memory. And so the system, the paint system, was all manipulating those bits digitally. And so what was amazing, this is 1973, 10 years, 11 years before the Mac. 1973, he gets this working in April. And the way that the system, so anybody who's used any paint program has used exactly this metaphor, invented, there you go, it works, sort of. Anybody who's used a paint program has used something, exactly analogous to this, and it's basically the metaphors that he, in collaboration with a few other people in the lab, came up with. So it's one part of it. It was actually one television screen. So one television screen was the canvas, where you draw and stuff, but the other was the palette. So you choose your color, you choose your brush size and shape. You choose various effects, various animation effects, and then you go over using a stylus on a massive tablet as opposed to a mouse, but other stuff was done using a mouse at PARC. So you use a stylus on a tablet, and you go over onto the canvas and you draw things. And that was the thing. So now now it's maybe motivating why Alvy was so amazed by it. So Alvy was had a PhD in computer science. Also, he had been a mathematics professor at NYU, I want to say, had a really bad accident and then totally rethought his life and got in his, VW van or whatever it was and drove across the country to visit his pal Dick Shoup and try to figure out what's next for his life. That's the hit like a lightning bolt. You know what I mean? It was sort of very fallow ground, if that makes any sense. He was ready. I mean, he had all the, again, PhD in computer science. The guy's a freaking rock star. So very ready to appreciate and understand all aspects of this from a computer science perspective, but also he's an artist and a painter, so that's why the clip or, the quote that you gave, my dad saying, it was one person who could understand it. Again, understand it technically, but also really appreciate it artistically.
And I dropped this image in the chat, but the image, it works, bang, underneath written, sort of, your dad holding it above. And this is an image from the actual system, right? I mean, this is the... So this is April 1973. So obviously 1970s. Look at it's grayscale, but it's flaming red hair. So this is the very first image that was taken by SuperPaint, and he had not yet debugged so it's using a Data General 900, something like that. I don't know. Using some mini computer of the time, he hasn't. That's it. DigiNova, exactly right. He has not yet. He's gotten the frame buffer, but he hasn't yet debugged or even hooked up the DG system. So he took this picture because he finally had the frame buffer working. He apparently needed to pull apart or put the clip leads back on with his knees so that he could get this image. So so it's on and the image is in memory, and before it degrades or whatever, he needs to, because he wants to save it, he now connects up the interface to the DigiNova and debugs it because it's super complicated and figures out how the interface works, and writes the code for he's writing the code on the fly. I don't know, like some stupid hacker movie. He's writing the interface code on the fly in, of course, machine code to save this image, and it works, sort of. And this is, I mean, this is an extraordinary moment in the history of humanity. This is like Alexander Graham Bell, Mr. Watson, come here, I want you. I mean, I feel it's like this is a breakthrough, and I the fact that he's having to manipulate it with his feet shows he was working by himself on this, really. I mean, this is
he definitely had help from a few other people in the lab, but everybody. He's a pretty modest guy, but he did it all himself. I mean, he had a bunch of help on a few things from a guy, Bob Flagle, in the lab, and Patrick Baudelaire, I want to say. But he mostly did it himself. And, he's 30 years old at this point, not quite 30. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then
Wow.
we'll do all this if you want, but like fast forward, he won an Emmy for this 10 years later, television Emmy, and then he won an Academy Award, a Science and Technology Academy Award. So not an Oscar, because it's not a statuette, but a Science and Technology Academy Award in 1998 for this work. And so again, we mentioned Alvy Ray Smith as being his collaborator and like his most excited fan or whatever. And they collaborated for a number of years at PARC. And then, over time, people left to go found their own things, including Alvy. So Alvy went to New York Institute of Technology and hooked up with Ed Catmull, who had been doing graphics at Utah. And then they ultimately got themselves acquired in to become the computer group at Lucasfilm.
Right.
And then... let's see. Then they did. They were planning to do something for Empire Strikes Back, but Lucas didn't want to. They did do something for Return of the Jedi, but their famous calling card was the Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan 1982 Genesis effect. So people who remember watching the Wrath of Khan will remember the Genesis device. It takes a dead world and turns it into something living. So that whole, it's like a 2-minute sequence, is the first fully computer generated animation sequence in a major motion picture. And with that calling card, they ended up doing a bunch more at Lucasfilm. They spun themselves out as Pixar. Steve Jobs got involved. Toy Story, back to Disney, acquired by Disney later in life. But that's that's a super quick thread there. But yeah. Sorry, let me just finish this thought. Sorry, Bryan. The television Emmy was a thing that SuperPaint was used in a bunch of television things, including by NASA for the Pioneer Venus mission in '77, the Pioneer Saturn mission in '78. It was known in television that this thing existed, but Dad never did anything in movies, right? So why would the Academy, award him a Lifetime Achievement Award? Well, it was with Alvy and another guy, Tom Porter from Pixar. It was because in 1998, the Academy went to the Pixar folks and said, we would like to give you a Lifetime Achievement Award. We think you've earned it for Toy Story and the whole deal. And Alvy, to his great credit, says, sure, happy to take that, but you also have to find this crazy guy, Dick Shoup, and give him the same award because SuperPaint, because this inspiration, and so on. So,
which I think is, so inspiring in so many different dimensions. Because I think that the way people commonly think of PARC as, Steve Jobs kind of descends upon PARC and realizes that they're going to kind of fumble the future. And does the Lisa and the kind of the narrative is this kind of not giving credit where it's due, perhaps to the Alto. And I kind of love this other narrative of this kind of PARC within PARC. This person is too renegade for the rest of PARC. Right. That Bob Taylor's like, what are you doing over here? What this is not. When I said pick anything that you want, this is not what I meant. I didn't actually mean it literally.
Oh my God. I'm sure that was exactly the conversation that was had with my dad many, many times. And again, to quote Alvy, he's very stubborn.
Right. So Bob Taylor is an enormous inspiration to me personally in terms of the way he got people to take on really hard problems. I think is really inspirational, and I can definitely understand the Bob Taylor perspective of this. Of look, we're trying to we're pretty crazy, but we're not that crazy. You're kind of 2 hills further ahead of us in a way that is really tough. But I also just love this kind of the fact that Alvy Ray Smith really wanted to make sure that your dad got the credit he was due. That it was not about stealing the work of someone else or pretend. I think it's really when I say that is just it is a great Silicon Valley story in terms of very inspiring.
It's exactly the opposite of the current those articles we were talking about in the beginning, right? So Alvy could have said, I invented computer animation, and like he wouldn't have entirely been wrong, right? But every time he's interviewed, I mean, Google anything that Elvie says about his background, he will in the first paragraph say, "Yeah, I was really inspired to, I was doing a bunch of graphics and I was interested in this area, but until I saw SuperPaint and got inspired by Dick Shoup, I didn't see how it would be the next multiple decades of my life." So I mean, exactly. Credit where credit is due, but in a wonderful. I mean, Albie's wonderful, like a wonderfully humble and I don't know, confident. If that makes any sense. Like Albie's got accolades up and down and left and right. Like he doesn't.
Exactly. I mean, he's like, I'm not worried about I'm not taking anything away from myself by giving credit where it's due. Like I've got total self-confidence. But I also feel like that there's something really about the fact that, there at the moment, right? Like I know what the before times were like. I know what the after, like I was there when this was created. This is not, and I think one of the challenges that we've got in Silicon Valley, and this has been true at different times in Silicon Valley's history, but this idea of, and you see people who have inherited wealth who pretend that they built it themselves. It's like, well, everyone should, it's like, well, you didn't build the stuff that you're talking about. And, you like when you say Silicon Valley built the modern world, why shouldn't we run it? It's like,
who are you?
Right.
Is that Bob Taylor saying this? Sorry, exactly. Is this Bob Noyce? Are you Gordon Moore? Are you, I mean, sorry, you didn't build any of this stuff. You inherited it, pal.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true.
This is daddy's money, and you and I get it. Like on the one hand, I want to allow people their own like search for meaning and but I mean, come on. I mean, and I feel that we all have kind of a challenge of like when we've got these kind of great contributions that kind of come before us, and how do we get kind of inspired by those and build the next thing while still understanding how fortunate we are for those that kind of ancestry that solved all these hard problems.
Yeah, look, everything in a modern computer. I mean, you know more than anybody, you guys at Oxide, right? Everything in the modern computer setup, any modern computing system, is layer upon layer upon layer of outrageous invention and discovery and science and hard work and perspiration in addition to inspiration. Like every layer is like there's somebody whose life's work was that thing, and totally. We have now, I'm making this up and you would know, like, okay, there's 100 layers or whatever, right? And like every single one, you're right, you know what I mean? Like every single, and you're like, that's only the firmware.
When also like on the one hand, it is kind of like, okay, no more layers, please. Like I need, because the other thing that we've discovered, and of course in Oxide, is then like, you get down to enough layers and then the world goes analog again. You're like, what is this? It's like, oh yeah, sorry, digital's a lie. What do you mean digital's a lie? It's like, no, that's what you software people need digital. So we've created, but it's actually, this is an analog system. You're like, that is extremely unfortunate. So yeah, the layers never stop. There is an infinity of layers, but yeah, just your point, Randy, like when you get into like building these things, you get that kind of reverence for all the stuff that comes before you.
Yeah. And I think, there's, I'm not unaware of the like self-serving aspect of this, but like I do not think that people today fully understand how much of current software systems that they work with owe everything to PARC. Yeah. Right. And again, not even my dad, right? Like again, my dad, to your point, and it's correct, is like an offshoot of an offshoot. Like he, his work, as he would say, did not figure in the main line of Alto to Star to Lisa to Mac, etc. And like that's fine. He was he felt happy with what he did. But I think it is way underappreciated by particularly the younger generations, right? Get off my lawn. How much in 1973 was there, and it was so far ahead. I mean, it took 10 years minimum. The IBM PC came out, and there was nothing graphical about it. Right? That's 10 years. Yeah, right. So it took till the Mac, and amazing, but still, and this was quite the long. Like the PARC people were looking at that, going, A, we had that 10 years ago, and B, what a toy.
Right.
ultimately not one. And, breadth versus depth, if that makes any sense. Like, right. I mean, it went viral and did the personal computer that Alan Kay wanted to build. But yeah, I just don't think, I don't think we appreciate enough the giants upon whose shoulders we stand, if that makes sense.
I totally agree with you. And so one question I've got with you too, but in terms of like the breakthrough, because to me, the breakthroughs at PARC are not merely technological, but they're also cultural and organizational. Oh, yeah. And these are breakthroughs that and this is maybe a good segue to kind of your own career. Well, first of all, this is a little intimidating to have this as, I mean, this is like no pressure, by the way, but like, aren't you Dick Shoup's kid? Like, I'm kind of like, what was it like growing up in the shadow of that? Or is this actually a relief that it stands so tall that I actually don't have to worry about like my own sense of intimidation? What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. So when I was growing up, I was always interested in math and computers, and I didn't appreciate how different it was. No one appreciates how different their family is until they have experience with other families later in life, right? So I didn't know it was weird to be a 5-year-old and to beg your dad to take you to work on the weekends, which I totally did. So my parents were divorced when I was 4, but dad was around, and my brother and I would be with him on weekends most of the time, and he would work because, hey, he liked to work, and we could not have been happier to go to PARC, because when we were babies, or not babies, when we were little, we used to play in the beanbag conference room and make forts, and then later on, really, in retrospect, his was the only work that would appeal to like a 5 or 6 year old, right? So he's building this.
Right. You were getting screen time before any other kid was getting screen time.
That's right.
And I didn't know that. Again, like, wait, don't you beg your dad to take you? No, my dad's a teacher. Like, yeah. So we would beg him to take us to work, and we would again play in the beanbag room when we were younger, and then. There was a Star Trek simulator thing, which of course we loved to play. And then as my dad's stuff with SuperPaint came along, we would draw pictures of spaceships, and then we would print them on the laser printer in color.
Oh my God.
And so the one time he told me not to like divulge anything was when we printed out the color thing from the laser printer. He's like, maybe don't show this to anybody from IBM.
And what year is that?
Gosh, let's see. Maybe 77.
Oh my
I'm just
God.
imagining my 7-year-old showing up with like a laser printed drawing, and just imagine. I just can't even imagine what it would be like to bring that to school in that era.
Yeah.
Just like it's like walking in with a bar of gold or something, just unimaginable riches.
Yeah.
Or coming to school in a hovercraft. I mean, this is like 1977. Right. This is like the laser printer would not be broadly commercialized for another decade, and that's black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like literally seeing the first laser printed thing by a friend whose father was a software engineer, had a laser printer at work, and I printed this thing out, had laser printed, whatever, like an agenda for a scout meeting or whatever it was. And I remember like just my eye, just eye popping.
Like, no perforations on the edges.
No,
pull off.
Yeah, right.
It's
no
hard to contrast like a dot matrix printer to a laser printer. You're like, this is like, you took this to a professional printer? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it was, and that was in like 1987. I mean, it's like in 1977, you had, and that was in black and white. I mean, I just think that I mean, you would literally start a religion on the spot. Like, no joke. You'd be like, Randy, I think you had the opportunity to be a prophet. I think you could have been like,
so many missed opportunities.
You could have been like the Randy Farians. Like, didn't they? I thought there was like wasn't there like a ritual suicide or something they did? No, the Randy Farians were
they prayed to the laser printed
the laser printer god. Absolutely,
spaceship gods.
The spaceship gods. I would have 100% would have prayed to the spaceship gods if you showed me a colored laser printer image in 1977. That is absolutely
Unthinkable.
bonkers.
Yeah.
Unthinkable. It is unthinkable. There is no modern analog that's gonna. Wow, that is amazing. And I also love that you're like making beanbag forts in Xerox PARC. I mean, at what point were you? I mean, in your kind of so you obviously you grow up in the Bay Area, you grow up in Mountain View, or I get what you San Jose,
Palo Alto and San Jose.
Palo Alto, yeah. At what point were you just like, wait a minute? That was Xerox PARC. That was. I mean, you must, or did you? Maybe you had the sense of gravitas at the time, but
no, I really didn't. I mean, yeah. I mean, when you're a kid, you're a kid. Things, whatever your experience is, seems normal. So I only really. I mean, I knew it intellectually, maybe let's call it in junior high and high school, but it didn't really hit me maybe until college or later. Just how very, very different that experience was, right? Yeah, I mean, again, we all stand on shoulders of giants. Anyway, but you're asking the question.
Making beanbag forts in like Faneuil Hall or something. I'm trying. What is the analog for this? It's like it is. It kind of anyway. It defies analog. It's just really extraordinary.
I mean, I don't. This is only an analogy that I just thought of, and I don't know if it works. But one could imagine growing up in a royal family. And so this was not our case. We were very middle class. One thing Dad never did was make a huge pile of money, which is fine. He had a great life. But yeah, no. I mean, I guess if you're talking, you guys are reacting in the way that you're reacting, and the only thing I can think of that comes immediately to mind is somebody that grows up in some like actual castle, right? Castle. Well, I walked out and we had the horse carriers, brought the horse for the day, and then I rode it and blah blah blah.
Or on President's Day, Sasha and Malia, like.
There you go.
Coming of age,
yeah, right, exactly.
Whatever.
Show and tell.
Big fans of the pod. Big fans of the pod. Those two.
That's right. Call anytime. We'll have you on.
Exactly. Love the baseball one. Absolute big Ballers fans. Those two.
So anyway, you did ask quick. I'll just quickly answer. Like, how much of a or in terms of expectations, and as I like to quote from the Tom Mariazzi of Car Talk. Happiness is reality minus expectations. So expectations were higher. I mean, look, I already tick all the privilege boxes, right? White, male, hetero, grow up in a strong economy, tick, 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 tick. So the expectations should already be higher. But yeah, Dad set a pretty high bar. And also, he never, I don't know how to feel about this, to be honest. He never once placed any expectation on me or my brother. And as part of me, it's like, wait, you don't think it could be as good? It's like, well, maybe not. So, kind of goes both ways, I suppose.
Yeah, that's why. Did you know? You're interested in this stuff. Did you have any reticence about going into computer science?
Yeah, actually, so I didn't. Yeah, so my, and this wasn't because I was scared away, but I just thought my talents were elsewhere. So very briefly, in high school, I did debate. And so like all but one other person I can think of who was, that I knew from high school debate, I was planning on becoming a lawyer. And I was super interested in international relations and, that time's height of the Cold War. So I was really interested in reducing the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that, the U.S. and the Soviet Union had pointed at each other. And so that was a real, thing that I really cared about. And so my things don't always work out as you expect when you're a kid. So if you asked me at 13 all the way through to 23, I would have said my career is to be an international lawyer. It turns out that, so I majored in political science at Stanford, but I also wanted to study math and computers because I was always interested in them. And thankfully, Stanford didn't have minors when I went, because otherwise I would have gotten a minor and fine. But instead, the only way to do it seriously was to double major in mathematical and computational science, which was like nobody did that. It was like a handful of us in that major. Wasn't the computer science major. Even then, that was not that many. I hear it's like a third of the school is now computer science major.
Right.
I mean, not even joking. So now the major that I had is the data science major. Interesting. But anyway, whatever. So I had double major in the two things, and then during during school, for another weird set of coincidences, I ended up interning at Intel for several summers. And so got a taste of, as a software engineer, so got a taste of doing software at Intel.
So you were interning even though you were a poli-sci concentrator, because you'd taken enough computer science courses, or you were able to and realize, like, okay, this is what I want to do for my.
I did not ever lie, but I bluffed as hard as I possibly could. Yeah, so I will tell the story because it's funny. So my roommate sophomore year was a double E. Weirdly, he studied double E and is now a lawyer. I was planning to be a lawyer, and now I'm a computer guy. So I don't know where Stan Z went wrong and I went right, or vice versa. Yeah, we crossed the streams and went entirely different directions. Anyway, so Stan was a double E and very good at it. And so I'm reading one of my poli-sci books, and he sets the phone down in the room, and he says, "Hey, this was weird." I said, "What?" He's like, "Well, you know how I just got this is like fall of the sophomore year. He's like, "You know how I just got an internship at Intel for the summer?" I'm like, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I just got another." I'm like, "What?" And the story was the guy, so he had applied to several. A guy said, "Please hire Stan," and then went on vacation for 3 weeks. And when he came back, he said to the whatever executive assistant or whoever, "Hey, did you hire Stan?" And forgot to do that. Anyway, so they called Stan back.
I never bluffed or lied, but I did go by Stan for 2 summers.
No, not quite. So
I just responded to Stan. I didn't tell them.
There you go. That's right. That's right.
It is your inference that my name is Stan because you called out Stan and I responded. That's right. On you.
That's right. No, I did it above board. So Stan had already taken another internship at Intel, and so he said, "Do you know anybody who would want this internship?" And I was like, "Well, I had applied at the Arms Control Center, to work over the summer, but they haven't gotten back to me. So sure, let me talk to them." And so I ended up, working really hard on talking about all the math classes that I had taken and, the limited computer science, and, really tried to impress upon the guy who became my boss that I could learn things, and by the way, my dad does this stuff, so whatever. And anyway, so he later.
I definitely have a question on this. No, because like dropping the dad reference is gutsy, right? That can backfire big time on you.
Totally.
I didn't know. All I knew was this was hey, I've been around computers for a long time. My dad used to do this thing, and
So my analog to this actually is I sliced my nose skiing. So I was skiing, and I was kind of midair and a deep snow. I come out of my boots and fly, and I know my skis are still going, and they come up behind me and slice my nose. My ski did.
Ooh, ouch.
And so I'm bleeding kind of profusely out of my nose, which is just like a lot of blood. Yeah. And I need to go get stitched up. So I'm in the Tahoe emergency, the Truckee clinic there, and I'm about to get stitched up. And actually in some strange ways. So my father's an emergency medical physician, right. And emergency medicine is actually, like computer science, is very young. And my father ended up being working in one of the first residency programs in emergency medicine, and for the pioneer really of emergency medicine, Peter Rosen. And they were writing the book on emergency medicine. He's just doling out chapters to these like kids. And my father ended up writing the chapter. We wrote a bunch of chapters, but one of the ones was on facial lacerations. Yeah. And so here I am with a facial laceration, and I'm like, and one thing I definitely knew is the scarring that you're going to get is based solely on the hands that are on you. It is if someone is paying attention and is dexterous, you will not have a scar. And if they aren't, you will have a scar. So I'm like, I have got kind of like a very limited window. Like, do I name drop this or not? And the needle is coming at my nose as this guy's going to stitch me up. And I'm like, so, this could backfire. Like, what is kind of a snotty thing to say? Being like, oh, by the way, have you heard of my dad? But I'm also like, but this could be a scar I could have like on my nose for the rest. I could be like known as Scar Nose for the rest of my life, So I'm like, it's funny. And he kind of stops. He's like, what's funny? I'm like, well, here I am. I've got a facial laceration. I'm in the emergency room. I got this facial laceration.
Just a regular Cantrell.
Just a regular guy with a facial laceration. And, it's funny because my father actually wrote the chapter in Rosenbark and on facial lacerations. And he's like, oh, and you could just see, and I'm like, it's backfiring. This was a mistake. I could just see the guys like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what are, okay. And he says, who's your father? And I'm like, well, it's Steve Cantrell. It's like, oh, Steve Cantrell from Colorado General. And he had done a residency. He had been in Colorado General. And I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, this is like dive and catch though. Like total dive and catch. And I'm like, this could have like, so Randy, did you have any of the same nervousness of like, do I mention that I'm like, that I'm related to Dick Shoup? How do I play this?
Yeah, I wasn't so strategic. I just thought I was trying to get an internship, and anyway, it ultimately worked. But it later, Bob Chan, who was my boss there at Intel, was like, yeah, I could read that you didn't really. He didn't quite say it this way, but you didn't really know what you were doing, but you really impressed upon me that you were willing to learn, and so I liked your attitude. I was like, whoop.
I thought that's great. Yeah, I mean that's important. And so what did you do for Intel? Because you were at Intel for a couple of summers, right?
A couple of summers. Yeah, I worked in the mask shop. So for you guys I know, but for the others, a mask is the to make semiconductors, you need this big glass plate that you draw the outline of the circuit on there, and then you shine now it's X-ray light, but then UV through that thing, and it makes a shadow, and it changes the chemistry of the thing you're writing on, and then you etch it away, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so
photography, for those of you who are looking to learn more about either the photolithography or then UV lithography and EUV lithography. Yeah. Sorry.
No worries. Anyway, so yeah, the mask shop, Intel did that in-house, and it was a pretty small group, and they needed people to write software tools to help them do statistical process control for the machines, and just a bunch of software tools. So I got a lot of playing around with Oracle databases and writing queries and graphs and so on for the technicians and the engineers to do their job. So I had a great time, and it was a great group of people, really, really fun. So I did that after sophomore summer, then after junior summer, and then I actually worked part-time as a flexible work hours employee, like an actual part-time employee, not an intern, for senior year. So I would take classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday at Stanford. Then I would drive down to Santa Clara to work Tuesday, Thursday all day.
And at what point is law school beginning to lose its appeal?
Not yet. Not yet. So very briefly. So let's say I graduated. I did not want to go straight to law school, because most people don't. So I worked for Oracle for 2 years as a software engineer. That was great. Had a great time. And then, much to the chagrin and surprise of my compatriots and manager, I'm like, okay, now's the time to take the GRE and the LSAT and, get all set to go to law school and international relations school. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, hey, I've been telling you for 2 years, this is what's going to happen. So I did that.
Well, you wouldn't take you seriously, obviously.
I should be taken both seriously and literally when I tell you that. Anyway, so apply to law school and international relations school. I end up starting a program which is a joint Stanford Law, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies Masters. Normally 3 years plus 2 years. If you combine it, it's 4. So I started, and the way that you do it is you do like a year of law school, then a year of the IR school, and then back and forth semester by semester.
Wow, that's amazing.
Anyway, so I did the first year at Stanford Law School. It was fine. And then I took they would call it a summer associateship. So, an internship for law students over the summer, and it should have been the perfect job, and I hated it. So it was the small office on Sand Hill Road of a big New York firm called Weil Gotshal and Manges, a tiny Silicon Valley branch office that did what's called patent prosecution, which is getting people patents. It's not about suing.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought it would be, and again, on Silicon Valley Road, on a Sand Hill Road, like right next to all the VCs at that very last, right before 280 on the right-hand side when you're going north, that whole complex there. It's a bunch of VCs that are still there.
Anyway, that's KP is still down there, but a bunch of them are still right there.
Yeah, there you go. I've visited several.
Sharon Heights, the Sharon Heights Shopping Center. I know it. It's like the waiting room for Silicon Valley. Starbucks in the Sharon Heights Shopping Center.
Even farther away. So like really right if you go from Sharon Heights to 280.
Oh, no, I know. It's just there's like literally there is no retail establishment between Sharon Heights and those offices at the intersection of Sand Hill and 280. So
because it's all like VC.
It's all VC firms. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so small office. It was casual dress, which was very unheard of for people in lawyers in 1993. But hey, our clients were dressed in business casual, so we were too. Really liked the attorneys, but I just hated every minute of getting people patents. And anybody who's been involved in a patent on either side, it is the inventor is up there on the whiteboard describing his or her amazing invention, and the lawyer is a scribe who writes down diligently all the things that the amazing inventor has invented, and then does bureaucratic infighting with the patent office to get a patent. And so every moment it was so painful for me to be sitting at the conference table looking at somebody designing or outlining their design on the whiteboard, where it's like, I want to be that person. I don't want to be this person. And that was a big soul searching for me that summer, because, hey, I'd been telling people and myself, wasn't lying, I didn't think so, for 10 years, this is what I want to do. And oh my God, now I have exactly what I've always wanted, the combination of the two interests, and I hated it. So I'm immediately thinking, okay, well, what if I finish up law school and IR school, I go in-house at a technology company, maybe in 10 years they give me a technology group to run, and I'm like, oh my God, you're an idiot.
Yeah, I didn't want to put my thumb on the scale on that one, but
no. Anyway, long story short, it was so obvious what needed to happen, but it took me a long time to get comfortable with it, if that makes sense. So I never went back. So I stopped out, as Stanford says, never went to the Johns Hopkins. I never completed law school, and I have never once ever regretted that decision.
I would say this sounds like the most successful internship I've ever heard of.
Oh my God.
To provide absolute life clarity.
Life clarity internship.
And Adam, to your exact point, if it had been anything else other than the otherwise perfect job on paper, and after my first year summer, I would have continued on, because it is formal dress, or whatever. Right. I hate that. It's a big firm that's all faceless. Or, tick. I would have looked for, just because I'm a human. Like I had this plan. I was going to execute the plan. So if it had been anything other than perfect and early, because the other thing is like, my whole life is going to be terrible, but hey, I'm already halfway through the program. I may as totally. I've
already done this for a year and a half, so I might as well spend the next 30 years on this.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people that come out of law school and never want to practice and don't. And you can do other things, but it would have been hard for me to go back to being a software engineer, which I did do. So I finished that up, and I went and begged for my job back at Intel, and my great friend and mentor, Girish Pancha, who just retired from being CEO of Stream Sets, welcomed me back with open arms. And
at Intel, so you were
at Oracle. At Oracle.
Yeah. I was going to say, I couldn't tell if you were being sarcastic or not about your time at Oracle, but it sounds like that was not sarcasm.
It's
okay. You're in a safe space. We can accommodate all.
Make it safer, Brian. Make it safer.
So it is both true.
We can cut all this out.
Oracle overall, it is both true that Oracle overall, even at that time in the early 90s, was, you don't want to be a partner with them. I'll have a sidebar to say about making your customers your enemy, and is that a really good business strategy? But I loved my little group. So, and all of them were great friends. They were all groomsmen in my wedding, and like my best friends for what's this now, 35 years, are all the people that were on Team Browser. And so we built this is before web browser, so that was only 95. Okay. This was 1990. We built a ad hoc query tool, which was called Oracle Data Browser.
Oh, interesting.
And it was all bitmap graphics, and you used you graphically built your query out of little boxes and lines. Imagine an entity relationship diagram, and then it was a spreadsheet output.
I gotta ask, Randy, when you bring this home and show it to your dad, is he like,
does he laugh?
I mean, yeah. Is he like, yeah, look, our intern at Park did that,
right?
Yeah,
20 years ago.
I feel like I'm looking 10 years into the future. No, I don't. No, I don't think I'm.
No. I mean, 10 years into the past. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Right.
Because right. So let's see. That was so I graduated.
Actually, that was very forward looking. Honestly,
totally.
Because that isn't. So you said that was in 1990. So that is in.
Yeah,
and Oracle was a much smaller company then. This is like how many employees were at Oracle? I mean, this is like probably less than.
I'd have to look. Thousands. Maybe less than
10,000. My guess.
Probably less than 10,000. Yeah, that's probably about right.
Yeah.
The funny thing about going to work for Oracle in 1990 and graduating from Stanford then is, I hope they have changed this policy, but at the time the policy was Oracle only hires from these 8 schools, and you can imagine what they are. And the very explicit recruiting strategy was, we will hire smart people no matter what, and we'll put them in any place that they're willing to do the job. So it was well known and well leveraged among my graduating class that, like, if you had a heartbeat and a Stanford degree, you could work at Oracle. So, there was a part of me, and I had people who are like amazing people in my poli-sci classes, like totally amazing people now in the school, now in actual foreign service. Receptionist at Oracle, was their first job. So that was actually a potential downside for me, because it's like, hey, we devalued this whole thing by, like, anybody from Stanford could come here. But I made myself feel good, and it was actually true that for the engineering group, it was like a little more rigorous, if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean, this is just in general true at Oracle, but the closer you are to the database, the more technically interesting it is. And so, that is their core product. And I think especially at that time, what you were up to, I mean, and so you all make this kind of graphical data browser that, again, is ahead of its time. And when you so you're able to get your job back at Oracle, and then how long do you stay there?
Yeah, I was there for a total of 7 years, from 1990 to 97. And you can forget about the year I was away, I suppose, at law school. And so after that, I went to a company called Tumbleweed, which did security software. Worked there ultimately as chief architect and a technical fellow for about 6 years. Brief stint at Informatica, which does, data warehousing, etc., data integration. And then I joined eBay for the first time. 2004 to 2011, I worked as an individual contributor on eBay's real-time search engine. So at the, now real-time search, you get that for free with Elastic. Everybody has it. It's easy. Nobody, as far as I can tell and find, nobody was doing real-time, all-in-memory search in 2004. So I didn't invent that.
Let me ask you
but I got
about that era, because we obviously go through the .com boom and bust, and I mean, in the bust was a thermonuclear event around here. I mean, it was
very busty.
It was very deep.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was remember that Excited Home facility on the 101 that went from like absolutely nothing, went from like wetlands to a new construction to full parking lot to empty parking lot with like rocks thrown through the windows to abandoned, all within like 18 months. And then it was abandoned for a long time before it ultimately became, I think, a Stanford building. But I blew past that so I was at Tumbleweed through the up and the down of .com. So again, that's 2000. And did you think about, like, at that point, do you just know so resolutely? Certainly, I knew resolutely then that, like, this industry is this is my calling. Like, I'm not. There's no amount of bust that's going to get me to do something else.
Oh yeah, I was loving doing, being an individual contributor and tech leadership.
Also, traffic was so much better during the bust. Oh my god.
Oh my gosh! And for so many years. Also, after 2008, it took several years for. It's very nonlinear, right? It took several years for 280 to get trafficy again. So Tumbleweed went public in August of 1999.
Let's go.
And as a sidebar, one of the things I loved about that place was it was founded by two people from Stanford, but one is an American who went to Stanford, and another was a French person who got his master's at Stanford, and they were the co-founders of this security company. And so we went public on, I want to call it August 6th, 1999, and so August 7th, a Saturday, we were moving. My then wife and I, then wife and I were moving, and we got everybody to help. So the day after, the French co-founder became a multi-10 millionaire. He and my boss, another French guy, and a bunch of other people from work drove up to San Francisco to help us move. And it's
I also just feel like that is such a snapshot of an age too, where it's like having friends help you move is something you grow out of.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but
not
there's a certain age, and there's an age in which it's age appropriate, and then there's an age at which it is not age appropriate. Get movers, and I would say that our last move was right outside of that age appropriate window, where I kind of realized that, you know what, I think it's time to get movers for the next
pizza and beer only works.
Pizza and beer, it's Tim and Claudia, God bless you for putting in a very hard day of labor for a pretty meager pizza and beer at the end of it.
Anyway,
that's so funny.
So public in August 1999, which is why I remember it. Rocket ship stock price, it was over 100 within, let's call it 6 months or so, and then about a month after it hit 100, it hit 3.
Ooh, wow.
Hate when that happens.
Oh man! And then you, of course, on the way down, because it's been at 100, you're like, it can't go below 50. It's like, why can't it go below 50? It's like, well, because it was at 100. It's like, well, now it's at 20. It's like, well, it can't go below 10. It's like,
let's just say this, that I learned a lot about the tax law, about how you can take, you're already laughing at me.
Loss carry forward.
Yes, loss carry forward. And so ultimately that
my loss carry forward from the .com bust. I was living off that for a while. Let's just say that loss carry forward I had for many years.
Let's just say I didn't pay any capital gains for the next decade.
That's right. Oh man.
I wish I were making that up.
Right. I know. Well, I wish I were making it up. So there we go. It's all lived experience. But I also felt like that whole experience though was also just a good reminder of okay, no, why am I here? Because it's very easy when employees are all checking the stock ticker every day. It's
oh yeah,
and I always felt that one of the things that was an interesting observation. I felt, Adam, that we did much better work at Sun in the bust than we ever did in the boom, and I think it's just when you kind of take away that. But when you get everyone there for much more intrinsic reasons, when you take because the extrinsic motivation has gone to 3, so it's
it was at 100 and now it's 3.
It was at 100 and my extrinsic motivation is now at 3. So it's I think I need to go look for some intrinsic motivation around here.
Yeah, look, I mean this is true. Every experience. Success comes from experience. Experience comes from failure, right? Totally. So all these things are learning experiences. I mean, they really are. And, we could have our blameless postmortem about it. In retrospect, I learned a lot. Okay, don't assume that everything's going to always go up. Take profits along the way, and various other things. And look, it cleared out the fair weather.
A company can trade for less than its cash on hand. That was always thank you, Wall Street, for that high praise. You were treating us like we were
worth less than.
than the literal cash. Like, forget real estate. Like, this is like actual cash on hand. Like, you don't. It's like, this is fun. We're having a good time over here.
Yeah, but you'll appreciate this, Bryan, in particular. Like, it clears out the fair weather fans.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
It clears out the fair weather fans. And is that a good? Like, do I want? Is that a thing where, like, oh, I'm so glad people suffered? Like, no, but this is what happens, right? Like, something bad happens in the world, and okay, it causes us to reassess things, and sometimes we make different decisions after something. Like, again, if everything's all well, it's like the trust fund baby, right? If everything's been handed to you your whole life, you don't really appreciate it, and you don't really learn from it. You don't really grow. Like, you stay as a toddler, at least emotionally.
Yeah, and I also think it's a very important point that when you have this kind of larger adversity, like there's a lot of positivity that can come out of it, even though it can be very hard to see at the time. And because I also feel that, like, we're talking about, you talk about your dad in 1973. 1973 was not a good time in the U.S. I mean, like, people, 1973, what is that? You think of oil lines, right? You think of cars. It's oil. It was the, Middle East oil crisis. It's cars backed up at gas stations, backed up around the corner, huge economic shocks all over the world. You are just outside of a deeply unpopular war that had in a draft that had really ripped apart the country. You had a president in the office that would later resign. It's just like there was a lot kind of going on. There were plenty of reasons for pessimism in 1973.
Yeah.
And and it's very easy, kind of in hindsight, to be like, oh, how amazing would it have been to be, at Xerox PARC in 1973, and it was amazing, but it also was like, just don't overly romanticize the larger time that it lived in, and that part of what made that. Part of that, I think that's the purity of Xerox PARC is you've got people talk about intrinsic motivation, especially your dad, where it's like, no, I am as stubborn as you're right.
Right. I want to do computer graphics, whether my boss likes it or not. And again, sort of bringing it back to the opener about, is Silicon Valley really all about hard right politics and money grubbing? Like, the researchers in that lab paid pretty well, but they weren't multi-millionaires.
Yeah,
right. There was no expectation from. They were doing freaking research, right?
Right.
So you could work for. If you wanted to do research, you could be in academia, or you could work for a government thing. You work for Bell Labs, you work for Xerox, and maybe IBM. But it wasn't. People did not choose that life. Nobody goes to be a PhD to make money.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, no one sits there for 5 years, doing what they do because they think they're going to get rich. Anyway, so just coming back to, again, is everybody perfect and it's all rainbows and unicorns? Like, no, of course not. But again, looking back can teach us a lot about, there really is a spirit to this place. And should there be other places on the planet that are like this? Like, as a Silicon Valley person, I hope so. I want that to be true. I want there to be the Silicon Slopes and the Silicon Alley and the Silicon Tundra and the Silicon Jungle. That's a great thing for the world. That's a great thing for the world. I know enough distributed systems to know not to have a single point of failure. But I will say that personally, I benefited a lot because I love travel, and one of the things that I wanted to do in my international deal was, hey, go around the world and make things better. Well, the world came to me.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. In the most wonderful. Do I also want to go places? Sure, I do. But what a wonder. The other thing I think people don't fully grok, again, because all the billionaires are all white men, is just how incredibly diverse this place is. Could we be more diverse? Oh yeah. Could we have better gender diversity? Oh my gosh. And also, people from every place on the planet come here, and they come here because this is the place to do this kind of stuff. And I don't think that's bad. Again, I want there to be more places. People shouldn't have to leave Nigeria to do great stuff, if that makes sense. But anyway, I just, I think that we should, certainly those of us who live here should feel really grateful about that.
And so let me ask you about that, because I do think that there is again, cultural breakthroughs in Silicon Valley. I mean, when in 1973, the world is very command and control, and Xerox is very command and control, right? I mean, that's part of, you got these kind of these nuts out on the West Coast, but Xerox as a company is actually very command and control. It's part of the reason that they do fumble the future, is there's such an impedance mismatch between the way Xerox is structured and the way PARC is structured.
100%.
But the way PARC was structured is actually much more fitting for what are going to be the next 50 years. And you look at the innovative companies and at their peak of innovation, and they all are structured. I mean, they look pretty similar to PARC in terms of
it's flat organization. So you guys are probably familiar with the Westrum organizational model, right? Pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. Bureaucratic is like rules and standards. That's exactly Xerox at that time, broadly. We do it this way because it's the way it's always been done. And then every successful group technical work over the last century, I will fight people on this, it comes from a generative culture. So PARC was absolutely, so very little hierarchy, respect for the ideas, not respect for the people. You're like, not respect for the titles. It makes sense. Like respect for the people, but not the title. If that makes any sense. Everybody helping each other.
Focus on trust.
Focus on outcomes. Autonomy, mastery, purpose. And it's exactly
triad is absolutely.
It's exactly. And also it was a business. So like they were not just trying to research for research's sake. They were trying to, Xerox didn't capitalize on it, but all the individuals did. They all invented, the future. Each individual one. So, it spawned out. There's a wonderful poster, which I would love to get access to again. I'm sure it's somewhere on the interwebs. That shows PARC at the center, and then all of the other companies that were derived from it, and it's outrageous. What they are. Anyway, where I was going with that was,
and by the way, like PARC, as amazing as PARC was, and singular, you can see a lot of echoes of PARC in Fairchild a generation earlier, and in terms of like Fairchild's contrast and Fairchild, and then what the way Bob Noyce structured Intel. I mean,
in the early days,
the early days of Intel, where and I mean, you can just there's this through line through Silicon Valley of when you see a group that did something extraordinary together. They are generative cultures. I mean, there's some real commonality there.
Yeah. So I am so convinced by that I did a talk, which you can find on YouTube, called Breaking Codes, Designing Jets, and Building Teams, something like that. And so so PARC didn't invent this structure. The three examples that I use are Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing and Tommy Flowers and everybody broke the German Enigma codes and the Lorentz cipher and won World War II. Again, exactly similar to this. Hugely generative culture, actually very diverse. 3/4 of the people at Bletchley Park were women. Of the 10,000 people at peak, again, autonomy, mastery, purpose. Exactly a PARC structured thing. This is obviously in the mid 40s. Lockheed Skunk Works, where they built for generation after generation the fastest, highest flying aircraft the world has ever seen. That includes the U-2. That includes stealth technology with the F-117. That includes the SR-71 Blackbird, which is still the fastest, highest flying aircraft, even though it was built in the 60s.
Built with slide rules, that thing. Built
Oh
with
my
slide
gosh.
rules.
And
amazing aircraft.
And Kelly's model there, again, starting very soon after the war. I think it was like 46, or maybe even during the war. Oh no, absolutely, it was during the war. What am I talking about? Because they replicated during the war. They replicated a bunch of German jets. They built the Lightning. They built everything. Anyway, where was I going with that? Again, extremely generative culture, and Kelly has his like 14 rules, which are almost exactly like, you could quote that verbatim and it'd be exactly like a DevOps streamlined team topologies setup today. Anyway, and then PARC was my third example.
Ben Rich's Skunk Works is a phenomenal read.
Yes, that actually was reading that book, which I got for my son, who's an aviation enthusiast, and the third generation of Shoup engineers, by the way, or will be very soon.
No pressure. Are you?
He's going.
Lawyer. He's going to do an internship as a software engineer. He's going to be like, you know what? Actually, I'm realizing that like the law is really my calling.
Yeah. By the way, I did say Kelly Clarkson and I meant Kelly Johnson. But anyway, yeah. So it was reading Ben Rich's Skunk Works book that I had bought for my son, where all this stuff clicked. It was like, oh my god! It's like describing in the foreword what kind of culture that Kelly had put together and Ben Rich had continued, and it was like, oh, this is exactly DevOps. This is exactly generative culture. And then the talk almost wrote it. I mean, I did a bunch of research, but like the structure of the talk like just wrote itself in 5 minutes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think this is this is a very important, again, through line in Silicon Valley. And because your career has really been not just about this kind of technical contribution, but much more so, I dare say, than your father, thinking kind of organizationally and thinking about like teams and how we structure people and how we motivate them. I mean, that's something that is really not what your dad did, but correct me if I'm wrong. I know he did. He started a company of his own although I cannot find much on it on Aurora.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, you'd have to come to my house to find any remnants of.
Okay. So we might do that. I actually did wonder about that. I'm like, because there's like Aurora Systems is what he started after Xerox PARC. And there is just not a lot on the internet about this company.
Yeah. So it's called Aurora Imaging Systems.
Okay.
And they built hardware. They built graphics hardware. They like SuperPaint ++.
Okay.
And started that in, I want to say 79. That sounds about right. And did that for 10 years. And then later, okay. then later he went back to research. So he actually went to Paul Allen's interval research, which was the attempt to recreate PARC. And then he went to a research lab funded by RICO in the Bay Area. Anyway, but Aurora for a sec. So yeah, when he was ignominiously fired finally, at PARC for, being too crazy and too colorful,
and also there's a moment outlined in the Dealers of Lightning book where they are having a meeting about how to carve up the hardware that he's using that they do not invite him to.
Oh yeah, right. He shows up and they're like, "Hey, Dick, they're having a meeting about you," and so he bursts in and yeah, they're talking about how to take all his. Yeah,
it's like, why do you have my right leg on a slide and you're feeding it to the pigs? It's like, what's going on? It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, he was able to rescue all of the hardware. And I didn't close this loop. SuperPaint is in the Computer History Museum collection. And it rotates. So there was a time when I was visiting actually with eBay colleagues. We're just like sometimes you do escape rooms as things. This was, hey, we'd go to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, and we were just walking along.
The Computer History Museum should have an escape room. I just want to say that now.
That would be awesome. I would totally do that. Anyway, so we go there and we're walking along, and I'm like, hey, here's my dad's computer system, and they're like, what? I'm like, read that. Amazing. Oh, it says, Richard G. Shoup, SuperPaint, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it's in the collection. And I'm not sure where I was going with that, but it's in the collection.
Then he does Aurora. So he...
yeah. So he founds a hardware company to build, think SGI, but like whatever, 10, 15 years earlier, whatever is the time frame. 10, let's call it 10 years earlier. Yeah, and so they weren't that successful. They sold to a bunch of television and video things. One could make up lots of things. I mean, arguably it was too early. but also arguably, and this is
VC
true.
backed?
Pardon?
Was it VC backed? How did he raise money for it?
Yes. There was a VC called Seven Rosen. That was their main investor. Actually, my stepmother is the niece of one of his investors.
Okay, stepmother is the niece of one of us. I'm trying to think.
He remarried. No, there's nothing. He remarried in. So again, my parents were divorced in 70. They were separated in like 73, 76, somewhere there. And then he remarried in 1990, and he married the niece of one of his investors, who he met that way. So
Seven Rosen is. I am pretty sure this is correct. Ben Rosen. Yeah, Ben Rosen, who's the co-founder of Seven Rosen, is an early investor in Compaq, and he is on the Silicon Cowboys documentary. Features quite prominently.
Cool. Yeah. So there's another guy whose name I'm blanking on, but will come to me later. Roizen, Roizen is his last name. He was also an investor and had his offices at the Oak Grove Apartments just north of Stanford University, where a bunch of my friends lived after college. But I remember going as a kid, and they were doing some deal, and they gave me a Coke, and I sat in a room for a couple hours while they were negotiating.
And you're like, this is like, I'm kind of used to Xerox PARC as kind of my bar for beanbag forts, and this I don't know.
I was like, hey,
this VC office doesn't feel as quite as historically relevant.
Yeah, I wanted to draw some spaceships or make some forts, and instead I had to. Actually, they I remember it was quite embarrassing because I must have been a little bit young. They had a videotape of what were the early Saturday Night Live people? Jane Curtin and a few other Saturday Night Live people did like a comedy album that they called, or where there was a song that was like, "Let's Talk Dirty to the Animals." And I remember feeling like I was super embarrassed. Like, they were using all these swear words and stuff.
I don't know if that featured prominently on the SNL at 50 special last night. The Let's Talk Dirty to the Animals. I don't remember that one being. So does Aurora for a decade, and that's a long time though.
I mean, look, he gave it a good run, and there were other companies that were doing similar things around that time. I mean, so there was a real need, right, for computer graphics. He wasn't doing animation systems like Pixar, did for their first decade, but graphics systems, like think for like television weather graphics, that type of stuff. Yeah,
I mean, so this is kind of the space that Avid is in now today. Do you know Avid?
I haven't paid attention.
This is like an early Avid. What was kind of his take on that whole experience? And did you have any? Because are you actually? I guess you're still too young to be working then. How do the years line up?
Yeah. So I do remember a conversation at Intel my senior year of college, where they were like, "Hey, do you want to come work for us?" And I knew that I didn't not because I wasn't having a good time, but because Intel's a hardware company and I wanted to do software. So they were. I remember somebody saying, "Hey, could you go work for your dad's company?" And it was like, that never occurred to me. And like, probably not. He's a little fancy. So but that means that in 1990 that was a possibility. So he was, or still must have been going then, but it wouldn't have been going for that much longer. Because again, he was at Interval Research, which is Paul Allen's attempt to recreate PARC, a kitty corner from PARC. He was there for the full 5 years. So I think that was 91 to 95, something like that.
And then, but in your career, again, you were really thinking about this kind of team formation and how you would. I mean, so kind of. I mean, it really does feel like you're kind of building on your father's experience in a way that taking it in a different direction. Is that?
Yeah, that's fair. Look, I think all of us, are obviously influenced by our parents, but there are only some of us that are like clones, and so. I mean, he wasn't. I mean, he would say, if he were around to say it, he would say he was never very interested at all in management or in team dynamics that were anything other than getting stuff done, if that makes any sense. Like he's mostly alone. I mean, he was a lone wolf, and not.
He's a lone wolf.
I mean, he made great friends with people, so I don't want to give that wrong impression. But like, he was not the team build. He was like a crotchety, crusty, as Alvy said, guy that he was pretty damn smart, and like he knew he could just do it all himself, and was very happy doing it. If that makes sense.
I mean, he's the lone inventor, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, that's a very good way to say it. Yeah, and he was always very much about ideas, if that makes any sense. So he was not the hardware tinkerer as much as he was the great idea philosopher. So much later in life, he was always interested in like physics and quantum mechanics, and he had some really interesting, actually on YouTube, you can look for them. He had a bunch of interesting lectures where he was trying to come up with and doing a lot of good stuff around scientific explanations for various like psi phenomena, So he believed in parapsychological phenomena. He believed that many of those things happened, like not a bunch of them were hoaxes and whatever, but he said not all of them. And he believed there's no magic, there's no sneaky whatever. It's just, we just don't understand the physics. And I don't think I can fully do it in 30 seconds, but he had an explanation of entanglement in quantum mechanics where things could flow both forward and backward. Causality flows both forward and backward, and it's pretty tight. And he never fully explored it in the last years of his life, unfortunately, but he was always intending to write a book about that and never did. Yeah.
But then
anyway,
by contrast,
spooky. Just briefly, spooky action at a distance. He's like, that's bullshit. But what it is when there's the collapse of the wave function, it travels back in time in the sense that collapse forces a particular thing that was always true. In the entangled particles. I don't think I'm probably not doing it justice, but anyway, neither here nor there.
So, but I think by contrast, your career has been very team oriented and have been kind of very. Is that? I mean, it must give you great. I mean, obviously you are a technologist as well, but just having that from your father must give you great empathy for that kind of contributor, because we still have like plenty of people that are like that make extraordinary contributions that are really important to kind of to inspire. And I mean, is that as your experience with your dad, I mean, helped you as an engineering leader?
I mean, probably in ways that I'm not aware of, if that makes sense. He was always very good at understanding things very deeply and then therefore explaining things very clearly. And I think that is a trait that I have, and I think is, not a little bit due to him.
Interesting.
I don't know. He kept, I'm not sure how to say this. He kept his work life private. So it's not like he came home.
Yeah.
In contrast to other people in my family over the years where, they come home and they talk about work and they tell work stories and so on. You know what I mean? And he was like, for him, it was, maybe it's the lone. I mean, now that we're talking about the lone wolf, lone inventor, like, it was all in his head, if that makes any sense.
And for whatever it's worth, I'm like that too. I do not talk about work at home. I'm always like, listen to the podcast if you're curious.
Do you like, Dad, how was work? Like,
it's like, go listen to the podcast.
No one's ever asked me that.
Yeah, exactly. Not right. And I think it's a trick question. Usually is.
What do you want? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever you want. It's fine. Let's just get, what did you do? What did you break? Let's just get past it.
Exactly. Dad, how was your day at work? What happened?
I'm not falling for that shit. Tell me what you broke. A question about like what are some of your like must read books? Certainly, I think you've already mentioned. We've already mentioned Dealers of Lightning. I think Dealers of Lightning is a must read for everybody. I really do think that's a terrific book.
For the topic, I mean, I'll give a broader answer because it's a more general question. But like the other one that isn't as well known as Dealers of Lightning is called Valley of Genius.
Yeah,
that's excellent. That's Adam Fisher, and it's a format that I've never seen done before or since, but is wonderful. He interviewed all these people, including my dad and like Zuckerberg and Jobs and all these people, Gates. And the book is as if they were having conversations with themselves using quotes that he got from direct conversations with them. So there is no text in there from him beyond whatever the foreword. It is only
just people speaking
Dick
in their own
Shoup
words.
says ...
Yep.
Alvy Ray Smith says so. Bill Gates says such and such and such. And the individual chapters are all themed, like, one about whatever, the internet, and one about graphics and so on, and various other things. And it's just it really flows very nicely. And it's as if these people are all in some salon talking to each other, right? Like intellectual salon, as if they were right. As if they were all
for pronouncing that in the original French, by the way.
Oh, you're
we're trying to get that right around here.
Yeah, but right. So yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. Learning wise, must read books. Well, it depends on what you're going for. I think you cannot go wrong with Accelerate. So that's Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, Gene Kim on basically how to do modern software correctly. And for fun, I like Gene Kim's Phoenix Project and Unicorn Project. Those are novels about IT, which I would, even though I love Gene and he's a great friend, I would have thought there's no way you can make our job interesting, but like they're page turners. Like I do want to find out how Bill just doesn't lose his job and blah, blah, blah. And, whatever, Parts Unlimited or whatever it is.
Adam, you are a huge Phoenix Project fan.
Yeah, big Phoenix Project fan. Yeah, Gene let me see the Unicorn Project early, so I like to think I had a very small twist of one of the characters. I've not heard this before.
Yeah, this is
no big deal. Yeah, no, I love Gene and really enjoyed Phoenix Project and Unicorn.
Yeah,
that is great. This is kind of like the blogging software that took your PR once, and as a result, you feel like
I co-wrote this blogging software. Oh, you mean you submitted a PR? Yeah, good.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying. I'm saying they got very good taste. That's all I've got to say. They have exquisite taste in PRs.
Yeah. I will very briefly. So very briefly. So the question from Blacksmith for Life is must-read books for individual contributors. And so super quickly. Michael Feathers, Working Effectively with Legacy Code. Have to read that one. If you have not read, obviously, Refactoring by Martin Fowler, you have to read that. I really liked Chris Richardson's Microservices Patterns, actually.
Oh, actually,
that's actually quite good. Happy to, if people want to connect with me.
Are we allowed to still say microservices? Or I thought microservices were what the persona non grata on that'll be, but maybe they're back again.
Well, I mean, at eBay and Google, they were never gone. But
there you go.
But yeah, look, I mean, we could have a whole podcast, and I have done podcasts on when and when not to use microservices. Do we live in an industry that is fad driven, and do lots of times people copy things they shouldn't? Oh yeah,
absolutely not. I don't know what you're talking about.
Does that mean that those things are wrong and broken for everybody? No. I love that. So that I have been trying to come up with analogies and metaphors for these for a while, and I put this one on LinkedIn a little while ago. Something like a fleet of buses. No one could possibly ever need a fleet of buses. All you need is one stupid little car. And if your mental model is it's a single family, well, yeah, you just need a car. But if your mental model is you're a municipality, then you need a fleet of buses. And it's not, right? One is appropriate for the one and the other is appropriate for the other. And, that's not weird.
So one final thing I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about Silicon Valley and kind of, Silicon Valley as literal spot, the Santa Clara Valley, and now really the broader Bay Area, and much bigger than that. I mean, it's hard. But because this spot did have these kind of important cultural breakthroughs, and I feel that actually one of those big important cultural breakthroughs is the ability to have a distributed workforce and have people. I mean, I'm kind of I mean, you know our opinions on some of this return to the office business.
Yeah.
Which I think, to your kind of earlier point about, I personally think that, I don't know if you want to call it I know there is a silicon tundra, but I think that how much do you think the ability, like the remote working to me, and I think we likened to this when we did the podcast episode on it, but the forcing people into the office feels to me like a forced dress code. And it feels to me like the forced dress code that people were bucking when you were at Kyle Washock and we're like, wow, this is great because it's like a dress down law firm.
Yeah.
It feels to me like that. What's your take on how a distributed work is going to affect the future of Silicon Valley?
Oh, wow. I have so many thoughts, and hopefully I can get them all. Okay. Return to office is the Roman Empire on its downward trajectory. Right?
Oh, this is great. Finally, we got someone who's like drawing grander historical metaphors than I am, Adam. This is I forget. I love it. Yeah. Decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Poli-sci major, dude.
There you go.
So it is the, and it scares me, frankly, on behalf of those folks. It's like Amazon, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, and I don't know how you recover. So Walmart too. I will say without divulging any specific names that people are rushing for the exits, and people are very happy to consider working for the entirely remote Thrive Market, where I currently head engineering, that work at companies that are doing RTOs right now. So it's going to force, whether that's the intention or not, and I'm equally as, conspiracy minded or pragmatic, depending on my mood, as you are, Bryan, in that episode. But yeah, no, I think it's going to force a brain drain no matter what. So yes, we now live in a world where anybody can work anywhere and do things. And this concept and also, so many things to think. I love and have for 10 years working remotely. And also, if I don't get together in person with my team at least once a quarter, being respectful of people's family time and so on, but I would prefer a little bit more often, then we lose trust and we lose the sort of not really collaborative opportunities, because I agree that lots of people can have ideas whether we're over video or not, but just there's nothing quite like being in person.
There's something special about being in person. Yeah,
in fact, absolutely. And in fact, on that score, I think I do not divulge any secrets when I say the reason that we are having this podcast today, Bryan, is because you and I were in person. You're laughing. You and I were in person on Wednesday at the San Francisco CTO Club, and we started having a chat about other random things, how much I enjoyed the podcast, and hence we're here. So there is, is it true that the only place to do creative ideas between people is in person? Like, no, that's crazy talk. And also, the optimal situation, I'm not going to call it hybrid because that has another meaning, but the optimal, like, the peak of it, or, the efficient frontier or whatever, is remote most of the time, and then get together every so often. And that's how we do it.
So, and I personally wonder if it's going to be, ironically, Silicon Valley companies leading the charge on that kind of flexible approach, because and maybe not, maybe it'll be that you'll see that happen elsewhere, but that requires a kind of cultural creativity and flexibility that because interestingly to me, the company that's not RTOs and NVIDIA. So it's like I think that there is, I think people would assume that, if people can work from anywhere, Silicon Valley will become nothing. But Silicon Valley already was metaphorical, really, and
I hope it does. I mean, honestly, like I say, like, I love the fact that the world has come to me. And also, I don't want this spa for the entire world. I'd love for a little bit less traffic on the 280, right? So I would love for it to be. And the other point I wanted to make about return to office is people have said out loud that, oh, good software cannot be built except by being in person. And I'm like, do you use any open source at all?
I sure don't. Next question.
Yeah, right. Have you ever heard of, I don't know, the Linux operating system? I mean,
right. No, it is nuts to me. It is nuts to me how, and I think that, but I think as you kind of like look forward, and this is why it is so valuable to kind of look at your whole through line and to know that especially young people who are excited about the possibilities for the future, but also wondering, like, having anxieties about that. Those anxieties are not new. We grew up in the Cold War, under the threat of nuclear war. Your dad was doing this in 1973 when there were gas lines. It's like you gotta find the joy, find the stubbornness, and at some point you gotta push past the anxiety. I think it kind of get to that it works mostly. Or somewhat. Was it? So is it somewhat?
It works sort of.
Sort of. There you go. It works sort of, which is just like that to me. Is like it works sort of should be the motto of Silicon Valley. Not move fast and break things. It works sort of, which is kind of where Silicon Valley kind of permanently finds itself. But I think we got to find ways to kind of stoke that great creativity and be inspired from it. But Randy, thank you. I really appreciate you. This has been a great, somewhat random walk, but it's so, I think, inspiring to hear your story and how like we can be. And thank you for being by the way, so generous with your dad that we all get to kind of, we all get to be inspired by it. And that again, it's such an extraordinary story. And PARC is an extraordinary story, but then your father's story within it is so amazing and has had such profound and lasting influence. I think it can really serve to inspire us all. It's really, really great stuff.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Bryan. Obviously, he's always been inspiring to me, and I think, well, given his lifelong interest in psi and occult phenomena, like, he would want to believe that he's there partly, experiencing the conversation. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, I think in any event, he would completely rationally, he would have liked to have known that this conversation happened, if that makes any sense, and would have been happy about it. All
right. Well, Dick Shoup, wherever you are, thank you for the inspiration to it, and know that it's been the torch is passed to it to another generation and a generation behind that one.
Indeed, third generation now.
There we go. As we look forward to hopefully again many narratives for Silicon Valley, but the one that is currently destroying the Republic is not the only one. That's all I'd like to say.
Yes, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, here.
Awesome.
Good. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Randy. Adam, thank you for your family too for accommodating. And this was a great one. We had Randy, was so great to hear your perspective and stories. Just amazing stuff.
Lots of fun to share.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.